Hello everyone, and welcome to the USASBE Meet the Editors series. My name is Julie Shields and I'm President and CEO of USASBE. We'd like to thank our editors and audience for joining us today for this informative deep dive on publishing in the Journal of Business Venturing. But before we get started, a couple of quick announcements. The call for engagement for USASBE 2022 Pioneer and Persevere has been announced, and submissions are already being accepted. The annual conference will be held January 5th through the 9th, and it will be hybrid. The in-person event will be held in beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina, and is being hosted by our friends at North Carolina State University and East Carolina University. Submissions are now open and will be open through August 31st of 2021. I also wanted to make sure that you're aware that we've launched our very own channel called Bold Entrepreneurship Education Television, or B-Vision, where we post new curated content every week. Episodes include tips on how to teach authentically and effectively, interviews with entrepreneurs, deep dives on research being published in our flagship journal, Entrepreneurship Education and Pedagogy, the Annals of Entrepreneurship Education, Volumes 1 through 4, and more. Access to this searchable, curated content is included with your USASBE membership. If you're not already a USASBE member, we invite you to join our community of bold entrepreneurship educators today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. But this series, Meet the Editors, is a free program of USASBE's as we seek to further entrepreneurship research and its application in entrepreneurship classrooms and ecosystems. We were challenged at USASBE 2021 at our conference by Bill Aulette of MIT to create millions of entrepreneurs. And this is one way we can do our part to share and promote excellent research journal opportunities just like this. So today we welcome Dr. Jeffrey McMullen. Dr. McMullen is the David H. Jacobs Chair in Strategic Entrepreneurship and Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. He is the current Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Business Venturing and former Editor-in-Chief of Business Horizons. Dr. McMullen will be joined by Dr. Andrew Corbett, who is the Paul T. Babson Chair of Entrepreneurship and serves as the Faculty Director for the Butler Institute for Free Enterprise through Entrepreneurship at Babson College. He is a field editor for the Journal of Business Venturing, the editor of the Advances in Entrepreneurship, Firm Emergence and Growth book series, and the past general editor of the Journal of Management Studies. I'll now turn the session over to Dr. McMullen to speak about the Journal of Business Venturing.
Hi, well, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to tell you a little bit about our motto of bold, broad, rigorous. JBV is entrepreneurship. I want to tell how we came up with that, why we think it rings true, and then we'll end with a conversation about entrepreneurial education research and the kind of research that we get, what we'd like to see more of. I am the current editor-in-chief. I have been about for the last 5 years, and I was a field editor for 3 years prior to that in the social sustainable development entrepreneurship area, as well as handled some stuff in Austrian economics, finance, and accounting a little bit when Dean Shepard was the editor. And so I have been with the journal for quite some time, so I can tell you a little bit about where we are, where we've come from, and where we're likely to be headed. First of all, I want to start with bold. We've been bold from the beginning. JBV was born in 1984. It was the brainchild of Ian McMullen from Wharton. And Mac started the journal, and one of the things that he accomplished, which was pretty amazing, was he had the first article written by Ronald Reagan, who was the president of the United States at that time. Since founding, JBV's been the premier journal of entrepreneurship. Our past editors have been Mac from Wharton, then Ben Catt from Darden, and then Dean Shepard. He was at IU for years, but he's now in Mendoza at Notre Dame. So we've had some great leadership through the years. We're bold in topic. We have a number of special issues that I want to talk about that are coming up that I think are important, that I think many of you would enjoy. One is about scale up, scaling, and scalability, and entrepreneurial scaling in the digital age. And the guest editors on that are going to be Nicole Coviello, Nambasan, Holger Patzelt, and Thomas, and that's going to be due February 22. So you have plenty of time to write an amazing article, submit our way. Another special issue that we're just about finalizing right now is Corporate Entrepreneurship in the Digital Era. And that is with guest editors Mertenu, Park, Tucci. That's going to be in 2022 as well, due on May 1st. And we are finalizing, hopefully, this one on aging and entrepreneurship as well. That would be in August 22. As well as those kind of special issue content special issues that are coming down through the pipeline. We also have a rolling special issue on reviews and agendas for future research. So it's important to kind of put that word out there. I don't know if people really know that JBV does publish review articles. Those review articles are usually core to the field. They're concepts or constructs that are core to the field, and they have a provocative research agenda that pushes the field forward. So it's not enough to just review the field or review a particular area, but to tell us what's next or where you think it could head that's different or engaging for scholars to do research in the future. We're bold in promoting your work, so we've put a lot of time into this recently, and you're going to see some of the initiatives rolling out in the months to come. Our goal is not just to publish new knowledge about entrepreneurship, but to share that knowledge with anyone and everyone who will listen. So we're going to make some serious investments in media, social media, and a website that's coming soon. So media of JBV led the way in in-depth video interviews of authors discussing their publications. So you may not know, but if you look at youtube.com at this address, you'll see just dozens and dozens of videos with authors talking about high-quality videos of authors talking about their research journey, why they wrote the papers. These are just really fascinating reads and fascinating watches about how people came up with their research, how they ended up with the article that they did. We invest heavily in social media as well. JBV is currently pioneering a number of social media innovations that include but go beyond the usual suspects of Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So please check us out there. But the thing I really want to talk about is something that hasn't yet been released, but it's in the works and it's close to being finalized. Is this article summary website? I'm going to show you a slide about that on this next slide. And it provides actionable summaries of published work and other author resources. We increase author engagement, reach of the published articles for the academic community. And we also increase relevance of findings for entrepreneurs and students. So for example, here's kind of the social media type stuff that you'll see, but here's an image from our website to come. And when you go in here, you'll be able to enter either as an academic or researcher or as an entrepreneur or student. And the summaries of the articles will be different based upon your focus. So are you using them for research? Or are you using them for practical guidance on how to be a better entrepreneur, or teaching an MBA class or undergrad classes about entrepreneurship? And this is led by Regan Stevenson and Sophie Bach, have been putting considerable time along with Andrew Maxwell and putting this together. It's really looking sharp, so I'm excited about that. So be on the lookout. We will, if you're on our handles with Twitter and such, you will see, we will put the word out when this is live and give it a look. If you want to be part of the digital media team, we'd love to have your assistance. So we are recruiting JBV, a digital media coordinator. We're talking about 6 to 12 hours a week, or JBV social media content manager, 3 to 6 hours a week, or JBV digital media intern. These are all volunteer positions where you just want to plug in and get involved with JBV. If you're interested in this, send an email to jbvmedia@indiana.edu just to learn more, and Regan will reach out to you and kind of tell you what he's been doing and how you can get involved. But we'd love to have you as part of the team if you're interested. So JBV's broad. We're bold, yes, but we're also broad, and I think this is important to point out. We're broad in appetite. Entrepreneurship, we are the entrepreneurship equivalent of the Academy of Management. We're all in one place, though. So we publish empirical work, qualitative and quantitative, like AMJ. We publish conceptual work like AMR, research agenda like Annals. We publish entrepreneurship education research like AMLE. We will publish editorials like AMP and Academy of Management Insights. And we even publish about new phenomena like AMD. For example, one of our most heavily cited articles recently was on initial coin offerings. We were the first to publish anything in that space, and basically read the paper, saw the paper, knew it was going to be a hot area, asked Phil Kim to handle it, and he marshaled and shepherded that paper through the review process, and it's been a huge success. There's a lot of interest in that space. Our biggest difference with the Academy of Management is that, like management science, we transcend management. We also publish work in finance, marketing, operations, as long as there's an entrepreneurship angle to it. And we also publish work in economics, psychology, and sociology that's about entrepreneurship. So sometimes entrepreneurship doesn't overlap management, but it's still very much about entrepreneurship. And we have editors that are trained in those areas and know what's cutting edge in economics, psychology, and sociology, and aren't restricted necessarily just to management. If your research is about entrepreneurship, JBB is interested. So a lot of people come up with myths, stories, beliefs that is my research of interest to entrepreneurship? And the answer is it on entrepreneurship? And the answer is yes, JBB is interested, always interested. I'll talk more about this, but it is important for you to realize that if it's on this topic, it will get a fair hearing at JBB. We are interested in that research. We are broad in representation. Entrepreneurship, we know it's a huge tent, and we respect that. We've sought and we continue to seek representation of communities of entrepreneurship scholars, no matter their topic or approach to it. So if you feel like you're doing something profound or novel and nobody has done that kind of research before and you're not sure where to go, I tell you where you go. You go to JBB. We will evaluate it on its merits. We'll look at its intent. What are you trying to achieve? If we don't have somebody who specializes in that area, we will probably look to bring in an editor that would do that, just because we want to make sure that if there's knowledge to be created about entrepreneurship out there, it will get a fair chance and a fair hearing at JBB. We have field editors who know the state of the art and who want you to publish and push the knowledge frontier forward. So it's important to us that you have to have somebody that really knows that area, and we've sought to have somebody that really is invested in each particular community, so they know what's hot, they know what's important in that space, they know what's been done, and they know what needs to be done. So we've tried to have a representative from each community possible. We are a market, not a club. And what I mean by that is we're seeking the best research on entrepreneurship regardless of its source. So you don't have to be from the world's most premier institution. If you've written an amazing paper and you've done some amazing work, it will be published in JBV. And I think that's important. You don't have to, it's not where you come from, it's what you do and what you've created and what contribution that article makes to the community of entrepreneurship that we're really concerned about. We're broad, but we're still specialized. And the way we do this is we have 26 editors at the moment in different fields. We call them field editors instead of just associate editors. And the reason why is because they've kind of specialized in their various fields. And so you can see, if you go to our website, it'll list everybody out, but this is everybody at the moment. And you'll see strategy and social and sustainable and psychology, management, marketing, finance, international, org theory, however, whatever entrepreneurship overlaps with. The core is everybody is an entrepreneurship scholar, but we all come at entrepreneurship in different ways. Some of us are focused on the innovation side of it. Some of us are focused on the economics of it. Some of us are focused on strategy. And so you can self-select, you can always recommend, this is the editor that I'd love to handle the paper. If possible, I accommodate those requests when they make sense and when that person's not overloaded. So it's entirely reasonable to request a particular editor that you think would be well suited because they know your content area. And if you don't see anybody that comes close to your community, then I want to know about it, because I want to know, is there a community of entrepreneurship scholars out there that we are not reaching on our board? We're broad in the the regions from which we get articles, most of our articles still come from Europe. That's the number one provider, but then North and Central America after that, Asia, and then actually Asia is next, and then you see North and Central America. And so we right now are highly representative of the world, honestly. It's an international board, it's international reviewers, it's an international journal. The people who submit are from everywhere, kind of the leading nations of submissions. So the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, China has come online in a fierce fashion, just in the matter of the number of submissions that we've seen from China is grown, and India has grown tremendously in the last 5 years. We're rigorous. So why is rigor important? I mean, it may sound like a bad thing because you're like, I just want my article published. I don't know if I want the highest standard in the world. Rigor is extremely important for a couple reasons. One, you know that the research is reliable and presumably valid. That's the requirement. That's what we're shooting for. Why is this important? Because when you go up for tenure, for example, if you're an assistant professor and you're going up for tenure, it's not just management professors who read your work. I served on my own tenure committee here at Indiana University this year, and I served with accounting professors, finance professors, marketing professors, information systems professors. And many times they would go and they'll read the articles. They'll pick a couple articles randomly, a lot of times haphazardly, and just go and check it out because they don't know the journal and they want to see the level of the research there. Several times this semester that happened, and I had one of the finance professors come back. He goes, wow, that work at JBV was extremely rigorous. That was excellent. And then he compared it to another journal. I won't say which one, but he said it stood out. And so it wasn't enough to just publish. It was, is this work well done? And he didn't just look at their article. He looked at other articles from that particular journal to see what kind of rigor and what kind of standard was being used. So this is important to know, that you want all the research in that journal to be good, not just your research, because it's being evaluated by people who decide whether you're going to be promoted, whether external sources are going to use that as a reputable source if you want to reach the actual practitioner market, if you want to reach policy, that they're going to use journals that they believe are rigorous. We're rigorous in terms of our impact factor has gone up tremendously just to show the reach of our journal. This is the last 5 years, 5-year impact factor. I'm going to update this soon with the 2020 numbers. I'll share those with you in a moment, what they're projected to be. But as you can see, this is not a one-off. It's been a continuous, steady stream and march in terms of entrepreneurship in general, but JBV specifically has advanced year over year. We're not playing games with the impact factor. And that's why I used 5-year averages here. So there's no gamesmanship. There's no way I can, if you prop it up 1 year, it would be lower the next. But if you do the 5-year averages here, it's just a steady stream of progress in terms of the interest in entrepreneurship and JBV's performance relative to our competitors. We're estimated that the 2022 year journal impact factor will be 9.9. I've been told by Elsevier it's probably going to be more like 10.5. I was conservative in my estimates. This is again expected to be the highest again amongst all the entrepreneurship journals in 2020, and then estimated 2025 year journal impact factor of 12.97. This is the 5-year factor. Again, that was my conservative estimate. It's higher from Elsevier, but we don't know until we get the exact numbers when they release these probably in June. So the trend is continuing is my point. We had about 900 new manuscripts submitted in 2020. About half of those get desk rejected. As quickly as possible, the editor goes through and says, can this survive the review process? Is it going to, or does it need to go back and perhaps it's undercooked? It's not quite ready for prime time, and they send it back to the authors. We do that to preserve and protect our reviewers. It's a lot of request. It's a lot of energy and time to review these papers. It's voluntary that our reviewers do that. If you are sent a paper from JBV with a request to review, it means that we've already culled a lot of the bad stuff, and we presume that this article has merit. It is worth reviewing. So please say yes when you get that request. We're not just asking every single time. We're being very judicious on when that request comes out. About 5% of articles are published of the ones that are submitted are published by JBB. Here's some numbers: about 12-week average until the first standard decision, about 20 weeks until acceptance on average, and about 70 weeks until it's online and final publications. This is pretty quick. I'll show you these numbers in kind of this is the same thing I just told you, but it's just in graphic form. So in 2020, as you can see, we had about 12 weeks until you got that first decision. And 20 weeks, sometimes people close the deal quickly and other times it goes on. We don't like to draw out the process and have more than about 3 rounds at the most at JBB. There's exceptions where the editor's really hoping and trying to help the authors get there, and maybe they're just not quite getting there. If you're getting more than 2 or 3 rounds at JBB, it means that the editor is bending over backwards to help you develop that work. It's not they're not drawing it out and making it difficult for you. It's quite the opposite. They're keeping the paper from being rejected. So please remember that. The average editorial and publication speed, we try to be extremely rigorous in this way too. We know that your career is on the line. We know that if you are untenured, it's 5 or 6 years until you're tenured. So it's important that you get feedback, good feedback, and quickly. And we take that seriously. As you can see, our numbers have been rigorous. They were up a little bit in 2020 for 2 reasons. One was COVID. There was a lot of reviewer fatigue and mishaps that just happened where people just fell off the map for a while because of unexpected illnesses and such. The other thing was we went to article-based publishing. And so all the new articles kept getting fed directly into publishing, were published almost immediately, and then the backlog had to fill that gap. And we're almost completely done with our backlog where everything is, once your paper is accepted, it's almost immediately published at JBV. And that's not the case for almost every other journal out there. We've been extremely rigorous about this. Finally, rigor and relevance are orthogonal, but we focus on relevance first and then bringing as much rigor as possible to a relevant question. We will not sacrifice that and go the other direction. What I mean by that is sometimes journals get obsessed with rigor to the point that they ask questions that are irrelevant just because they can be answered rigorously. That has damaged fields in the past, fields that I've come from. Strategy ran into this a little bit. Organizational behaviors run into this at times, where the methods start determining which questions you will and won't ask. We are a highly relevant field in entrepreneurship. And the one way that we stay important to our stakeholders is that we keep that in mind. So we are going to bring rigor to relevance, but we will not sacrifice relevance. It's relevance first, then as rigorous as possible investigation of a relevant question. That will keep our field relevant, not just to scholars, but to practitioners, students, policymakers moving forward. With that, I'm going to now switch gears and I want to interview and have a little discussion with Andrew Corbett, who's our field editor. He's in management, but he also handles almost all of the entrepreneurship education research that we receive. I typically tap him and ask him, "Hey, is this something that you can handle for me? And what do you think?" And so I thought today, here's some questions that we talked about, perhaps that you would want to know the answer to. And I thought I'd turn it over to Andrew and have his thoughts on these particular questions. Anything else he wanted to share about the kind of research that we receive on entrepreneurship education in particular. And with that, Andrew.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here with you as always. And thanks to USASBE for hosting us. So I want to say hi. I dropped in the chat box right away. I see some old friends, and hopefully we'll make some new ones here today. So shout out to Brock, Dev, Franz, and some other folks that I think we both know pretty well. Manuscripts I handle, Jeff just said it. I handle general management journals, and you saw the list that he gave before, how we're broken down. So I handle things there and a lot of things for him. Traditionally, I handled things for JBV in learning and cognition, corporate entrepreneurship, because those are areas I've worked for in the past. But most germane to today, I've been handling the entrepreneurship education manuscripts. And that's because, about a decade ago, I moved to Babson when I left RPI. And I immediately saw this, being at Babson, of course, as a research area that was beginning to grow, that was becoming more rigorous, and was really important to a number of different constituencies. So it's increasing an increasingly important area. And I'm glad I'm seeing a lot more experienced, really good scholars, some of whom, again, I just noted that I see on here today that are working in this area. So that's sort of where I am. As you can imagine, given what Jeff just said, so like question 2, what makes for successful manuscripts and is it different from others? And the answer to that would be no, it's not going to be different from a process perspective. As Jeff just talked about rigor and relevance. So should they be different from anything else? The answer to that would be it really isn't, and it shouldn't be. Good research done well should always be the same across the board. So as Jeff said, I look for a clear, compelling, and important research question in this space within entrepreneurship education. Something that's both interesting and important. And then, of course, it's, done rigorously, like Jeff said, executed well technically, written well so it's easy to understand. That's my euphemism for Jeff saying, don't get rigorous and pound the crap out of your paper that no one can then read it and understand it, right? It should be accessible. I always say, like, simple, simple is good, right? Not simplistic, but simple ideas that are important. If you can translate something new to an audience, so when someone reads it the first time, they go, wow, I wish I thought of it. And I wish I thought of, like, I did think of this, but I never thought about writing it in this way and being able to express it. So writing so that we can understand is important as well. So those some opening things for the first 2. As to unique problems with entrepreneurship education research, I think I see a lot of times people do things like sample as context, right? And sample as contribution. So, I'm doing a study this time of people in southwestern the United States, or in some country in Eastern Europe, or some country in South America, and they try to make their contribution around entrepreneurship education that we did it in this unique context. And those, look more like and feel more like replication studies. And replication studies can be important. But in this way, people will do things like, well, no one's ever studied this issue around entrepreneurship education in this part of the world, and so I'm doing the first study. Well, that's probably not going to get us there, right? Because it's got to be new and different, and maybe we find out something new because of the context, but the context itself can't be the contribution, right? So, something that will inform because of your unique context that might inform what we already know about entrepreneurship education research. So that's a problem, that's sort of the biggest problem. Or, studies that just aren't rigorously done, right? That just aren't done well from a technical standpoint. We still see that sometimes. And I think that's because it's a new sort of emerging growth kind of field, right? What else? Beyond that, well, what kind of research would like to see? I mean, I would like to see, Jeff and I had talked about this. We talk about techniques that we use in the classroom, things that we know that appear to work with students, but no one's done any research on it. Design thinking is one, everybody uses that, but I don't know who that was, but nobody does anything around it, and I think sometimes in that case, we need to go back to its roots. A lot of people do work in entrepreneurship and management education around design thinking, and they're only using part of what the actual original construct around design thinking is. There's a lot more to it. There's sort of a cognitive empathy, a physical empathy. There's a lot more in that concept than what we look at today. So I think that's one area that we need to understand better. The other one, it's an area that I do some work in, is around entrepreneurial mindset. Everybody talks about that. We change our students' minds, right? We make them think differently. Okay, well, can you do some research on that helps us understand how we really do that? Pre and post studies around how effective we can be with something like that. So evidence of doing. I think if you're a scholar wanting to do research in entrepreneurship education, I'd think about think about what you do in the classroom or what your school or university does. Do you really know that what you're doing is being effective? And if the answer to that question is no, and it's also important to know that, then that's an opportunity to do research. So comparison of different pedagogical approaches, and that can be both structural around these days. So we have online, hybrid, and face-to-face, like comparison of those approaches, which are better, which achieve the goals that we want to do. So structurally, and then also certainly pedagogically, right? Do we look at sort of simulations, having people practice, starting businesses for real as opposed to simulating or practicing? So issues like that. And I think there are some really good studies out there already that ask us these questions and provide emphasis. There was an AMLE done in 2017 by NABI, N-A-B-I, right? It was a review of entrepreneurship education, and was a really well done review that asks a lot of the questions that I just talked about. And then my colleague Heidi Neck in 2018 did a paper on the scholarship of teaching and learning entrepreneurship, which is a 2018 in EEP, which is the Entrepreneurship Education and Pedagogy Journal that just got started. And again, that was a Delphi study of experts in the field, and a lot of good questions that I just noted as well coming out of there. So Jeff, that's kind of the broad overview. I think maybe we might want to see if we can go to questions from people. I see a few things in the chat already. So
yeah, let me add just a couple things on that.
Sure,
I think two areas that on top of what you're talking about. So I see everything that comes through at JBV, and so it's about 1,000 articles a year that you just screen. And some of the issues that I see are a classic problem with education research many times is intention research, that it studies intentions, but it doesn't tell you, and Andrew was picking up on this with the context. I think context could matter with intention, but it's usually not. It's just the sample is from, say, for example, how do we get more students to want to start businesses in Ghana? Just to pick on Ghana, because I've done research in Ghana. I really love Ghana. But that's a classic case of, well, why would Ghana be different than other places? And that's not really spelled out. And where it could be, like maybe you've got into the institutional challenges or perhaps sociocultural differences between different nations or different areas within Ghana. And then you use some theory that you can inform through that process. And that's what's often missing is you see it could be anywhere. Basically, it's just an application of intention theories to a particular context. And that's not what we're after. You have to kind of make a novel theoretical contribution, and that's important. Also, it's important to know why. Why is it necessary? If you can move beyond intentions too. There are many people that are skeptical that an intention will translate into a behavior. And so it's important to kind of evaluate that. Why is intention the appropriate outcome here to examine as opposed to actual entrepreneurial behavior, and make a case for that so that if reviewers push back, you're ready. You've thought about this. This is appropriate. It wasn't just convenient, but it was actually the right way to approach the problem that you're interested in solving. Another example, when you talk about entrepreneurial education, it's not just in the classroom, and I think this is something that is a misnomer. We now have entrepreneurial support organizations all over. They're ubiquitous. Every incubator, accelerator, makerspace, co-location kind of organization, science parks. Many of these exist. Why? To give a forum or to help entrepreneurs help themselves. That's kind of the mantra or the notion behind it. They're building a context to be the brokers and the buffers for entrepreneurship. We don't know if any of these work. We've done some research. I've done a review that I'm hoping to have published very soon with Brian Bergman. And this is the issue we're wrestling with. What are we measuring? How do we know how the ESO is actually helping people? And when we say helping, what does that mean? How are we supporting entrepreneurs? Are they learning in that process? Are we teaching? Are they better for having entered that program than not? Are they better for having taken our class than not? How do we know these things are actually making a difference, other than we just claim they are, and we feel good about that. This is important because this is what we're arguing. This is half the value that we're arguing that we're teaching right now is the entrepreneurial mindset. So we need to kind of demonstrate that these claims are real, that they're true, and that they're not just wishful thinking. And that goes beyond the classroom. That's also consulting. That's also entrepreneurial support organizations. So these different contexts are the same questions, but those contexts really matter. They interact with those kind of learning models that we want to examine in this space. So with that, I think we will shift to some of the questions. I saw several good ones over there. And I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to address.
Yeah, I can ask you before we say, I just want to say one more thing about that, Jeff. That is what drives so much of those questions that I said, because I don't think, like, I know Babson's a private institution. We charge a lot of money. And I know we do a good job at teaching entrepreneurship, but I don't really know. Like, we've never studied it, even though we know. Like, we know anecdotally that we do a good job. And I think more and more as costs of tuition increase, students, parents, and others are asking those questions. Do you really do what you say you're going to do? You know, and so I think you're right on point. So that I'm looking at the chat box, Jeff. So a couple of things maybe quickly for you that you could answer. Yeah. First was like someone asked, how do we define business venturing? And then the other question I wanted to answer, but I think I should let to you is, on qualitative research, do you give more do you lessen the page restriction because we know that they need more space? So.
Yes, I think there's a couple things here. One, business venturing, we interpret that extremely broadly. So when the journal was started, it was unclear what entrepreneurship meant. People avoided using the term entrepreneurship because of its ambiguity and what it meant. And I think the notion behind Mac naming it business venturing was to be clear that we're talking about how businesses get started and how businesses kind of come into being, which was a juxtaposition with strategy, where the firm was taken for granted. It already existed. So that was it was a signaling device to say we're interested in where things come from. Now, today, Journal of Business Venturing is interested in anything entrepreneurship. Dean Shepard was worried about that, and he added the postscript, a journal dedicated to entrepreneurship, just to make it clear that we are an entrepreneurship journal for this very reason. So broadly stated, the answer here is if it's on entrepreneurship, JBV is appropriate. It's an appropriate outlet for you, and it's that simple. And what I mean by entrepreneurship is that there are lots of different definitions of entrepreneurship. There are lots of different communities. It manifests differently in those different contexts. It's up to you to make a case of why this is entrepreneurship research. If you can explain that and you have a community of people that also believe that and they agree with you, then you're okay. I'm not going to get dogmatic and say this is entrepreneurship, that's not entrepreneurship. The key is that you make your claim and you support that claim, and you do it well enough that other people in that community would agree with you that this is an entrepreneurship study. As far as qualitative work, I think this is a great question. I think Brock brought this up. I think it's a fair question to ask. No, I'm not militant. I'm not legalistic on how many the page count. Here's why we do the page count. Typically, it's a guideline, not a law. And the reason why it's a guideline is because reviewers only want to read so much, right? If you don't put those guidelines, people will turn in a Tolstoy novel and say, this is the shortest we could make it. That is a fact. It is hard to make your point quickly, and it's easy to write a long paper. It's much harder to write a shorter paper. And so the guideline is there to push you to be as concise as you possibly can. However, what makes a paper long is not always the length. It's how quickly the pacing of the writing is. So sometimes a qualitative paper can be very long, but not read long. It can read it can flow quickly. It can get to the point. It can make its case. And so I'm not going to reject a paper or not send it to onto a field editor because it's too long, unless it's just excessive and gratuitous and it's abusive to the reader. And if I feel like it can be shorter, I'll send it back. And we typically will go through that process with maybe a reject and resubmit, which is the paper's rejected, knowing that it's got multiple rounds ahead of it, but it's invited to be able to come back to JBV. The outlet's not burned, and many editors will use that feature, and they'll be explicit about what that means. Another question that came up that I saw was entrepreneurial ecosystems. That somebody said, I didn't see anybody for entrepreneurial ecosystems. I think
wouldn't that matter, like what angle they take on it, right? Because
exactly
using social networking theory through the ecosystem or cycle, right? That's how I interpret that. So it depends on. I would say it depends on the theoretical foundation. Probably would hint you to which editor you would give that to. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because if it's on digital, then it might go to Satish Namasan. And if it's on maybe innovation, like science park type stuff, maybe Miriam Knockhart might address it. I'm going to look past ecosystems because that's a frame, but that would be like saying crowdfunding. Who's your crowdfunding person? Well, it depends. I'm going to look at the method, yes, crowdfunding, but we have 5 or 6 different people that can handle crowdfunding. It depends on the angle of the crowdfunding. Are we talking about the finance stuff? Are we talking about maybe gender? Are we talking about the psychology of it? It depends on what that theoretical lens is. So I want to make sure that the person has both the methodological capability to handle the paper, but also the content areas, so they're interested in the theoretical questions being asked. That's why we don't have a crowdfunding designated person or an ecosystems necessarily designated editor in that regard.
Yeah. I saw, what else was in there? I saw there's I think it's a question near the end there, Jeff, that says theory of planned behavior to intention and actions. And maybe they were just elaborating on what you said earlier, right? It can't just be about intentions, but you want to see.
Yeah, so I think this is a classic theory that's used almost all the time in the intentions research is theory of planned behavior. And be careful with theory of planned behavior. It does say that it also, in that same family is like theory of reason to action. The intention, you form an intention, but an intention doesn't not automatically become a behavior. The environment has to be right for an intention to become a behavior. I can have the intention to catch a train. If the train is not there, it doesn't matter. I can have that intention compellingly. It could be just, that's all I'm thinking about is I want to catch the train, but the train still has to be in the station for me to be able to catch the train. And that's why many times a theory of intention isn't a theory of behavior. They're not the same thing. Too often, though, what we see is somebody will just apply the theory of planned behavior to a context, and that's all it is. So you see the same hypotheses as 50 other studies. So you need to look and make sure that your hypotheses. This is a great way to kind of see, have you made a novel contribution empirically? Is there anything distinctive about your hypothesis that hasn't been tested before in other theory of planned behavior studies? If I could pick up a psych journal and I see Eisen's work there, and I'm looking at it and it's telling me exactly what your study is telling me, then why do I need your study? Your context has to bring something new to the table that informs that theory in a different way for it to be an entrepreneurship study as well. We're not just publishing psych studies on theory of planned behavior. We're looking at entrepreneurship studies, and we're wanting to create knowledge about entrepreneurship using the theory of planned behavior as maybe one possible vehicle for that contribution.
One thing I want to say about entrepreneurship education research before I go there, and I think there's another question in there, Jeff, maybe you can look at while I'm talking, is just to remind everybody that we want interesting and important research. So think, like I always tell people, entrepreneurship broadly, if there is a problem that we know that all entrepreneurs are having difficulty with, and these days I see that often it manifests itself around issues of growth. Like if it's an important issue to practitioners, right, then it should be important for us to figure out. It doesn't mean that's the only thing, but it should be important to us. So I would guide and remind people, like if you see a continuing problem around, again, teaching, pedagogy, something that continually happens, working with, like Jeff said, incubators, accelerators, there's a problem that people tend to, that tells you there's probably an underlying important research question that we haven't figured out so that we can provide some answers to. So wherever you see that tension or a problem, that's where you want to look to. So just a reminder.
So there's some really great questions here that I'll read them so everybody knows what I'm talking about here. One is, I would like to apply French sociology of justification to my research. However, the theory is not as famous as its American version, institutional logics. Could you please give me some pieces of advice? Yeah, so I think this is a great question. It's true. This isn't specific to French sociology. It's anytime you're bringing in a new theoretical lens that is maybe unfamiliar or less conventional than what's been used in the literature, the number one piece of advice is to recognize that and address it head on and explicitly address why it's necessary. So you have to explain, why is this a necessary value add, a value addition over and above what's been used before? So if it's just substitutional, you're just substituting institutional logics out and you're using French sociology instead, it's just not going to make it. Institutional logics got there first. So now you have to say, okay, institutional logics is great. However, it's not as good as French sociology in these three ways that are extremely important to my study design or the questions that I want to ask. So you always have to do a contrast effect there to say, how is it that applicate, just like products, just like entrepreneurship, why is it that customers should switch to your product? You have to spell that out. What are the benefits to them for leaving their current product solution to taking your novel product solution? What's in it for them? And if you can do that, then French sociology will be embraced. That's the litmus test. And that falls back on the author. That's going to be partly about whether you're right. Part of it's going to be about how convincing you are in your writing, how clear you make your case. And it's a negotiation that you're really engaging with reviewers and editors to say, I think this is a superior approach. Another great question here. Yaya asked,
is that the single case study question?
Yes. So this is a great question. Do qualitative single case studies have a chance of being published? I hope so, because I'm working on a couple myself, for real. And I have wrestled with this. I think it's been very difficult. I've gone to some other journals because I don't just publish in JBV. And we've wrestled with this because many people misunderstand what the point of a single case study is. If you are looking at a deep, rich process and you're wanting to do process research of how X becomes Y, deep, rich case studies are extremely powerful there. And the point is not generalization. You're not trying to develop a theory necessarily. You're trying to show how something morphs into something else. That can be extremely logical, and it can be a compelling approach methodologically. You have to educate reviewers on that, though, because they've all been trained in generalizability, and they all believe that there's only one way to social science, and that's this comparative case study. Kathleen Eisenhardt has been extremely successful in her multiple case study approach, and the problem is that is one approach. That is not the only approach that's possible. But she's got a lot of people that have been trained in her methodology that like to see that methodology. So again, it's making a compelling case, explaining why your approach is appropriate, and knowing, paying attention to people that do that kind of research so that you can cite them and signal that these are the kinds of people that understand what I'm trying to do, value this approach. And so, yes, at JBV, we are open to a single case study.
Hey, Jeff, I think we're getting a call to kind of move towards wrapping up, but I see three other quick questions. So, Julianne, we'll do it real quickly. One is, Jeff, if you want to take a look at the bottom one on a conceptual piece, and I'll start on these other two. Someone asked about, spinning off journals, and then someone piggybacked off it. I think it was Jay who piggybacked off. Jeff. There is JBVI, right? But that's a separate journal. And we don't take rejections here, or we don't spin up. Jeff, it will be clear, if we got a paper that we knew was right for JBVI, we would say, look, send it over.
Yeah. But, so I transfer papers regularly to JBV Insights, and JBV Design is coming online. And that Elsevier asked me a couple of years ago what they wanted another JBV journal. They asked about topics. I suggested the design, and I mentioned a few people's names, but Henrik Berglund is now going to be the editor of that journal, and it's going to be focused on a lot of the kind of research that folks are interested in. I think it's going to have a lot of potential. And again, we publish much of the same stuff they do, but typically Insights is maybe a shorter paper, maybe it's not a full 30-page paper. You maybe don't have enough theoretical richness because it's brand new to the space and you're wanting to write a thought piece. I've done one myself on religion. We needed a foothold, and JBVI fit really well for that. And JBV Design would be the same thing. Perhaps you're doing design thinking research, and it's you're just having trouble with what's the theoretical contribution, but you've got a really interesting take on things. Henrik would definitely like to see that, I know. So yes, that was kind of the intent behind that, Brock.
So those are two. There's one last one, Jeff. A good conceptual model. So a template for a JBV conceptual piece off the top of your head.
It depends on what your objective is. So are you doing a variance-oriented model, or are you doing a process-oriented model? I've done both myself. Sometimes we have conceptual models that don't have a model. They're the framework, and you're talking about it in narrative format. So what I would recommend to you there is Ann Huff's book, Writing for Scholarly Publication, where she talks about identifying exemplars. And what she means by that is you find a paper or two that have a similar objective to your objective. They don't have to be in JBV. They could be in any journal. And you use them. Yeah, Andrew's got the book right there.
Not that I don't still refer to it. It's right on my bookshelf.
We both took the class from Ann Huff when we were in Colorado years ago together. And it's been beaten into our brains, but it's an excellent book on this very topic. But the idea here is that you're looking for a paper that is trying to do something similar to yours, and you're using it much like, you're stealing the melody from that paper. The lyrics are going to be your own. You're going to make the lyrics your own, because we don't want plagiarism, right? It's important that the lyrics are your own, but you're using the structure of that paper as a melody to help you figure out how to approach it. And then as you do that, you're going to deviate, and you're going to innovate in your own ways. But it's a great way to kind of give you a template to get started on a conceptual paper.